Hello and welcome to Films for the Very First Time, Season 2. My name is Jordan, and with me, as always, showing me new things that I've never seen is Casey. How are you today, Casey?
Oh, how's it going, everybody? We're back, baby.
Been a while. Been longer for the listeners, since we like to get these things started off in the advance, right? Filming in advance, but yeah, it's been a while. Hopefully, everybody checked out the trailer for season 2 and they know what they're watching, or else it's going to be in the title of the episode that you're watching or listening. But it was Casey's pick to start off season 2, just like it was in season 1. Um, and it also just worked out that way, where I had the last pick of the season anyway. So it all kind of worked out that's how we started. But Casey, so I throw it to you if you wanted to tell the listeners what did we watch for this week.
All right. So we decided to go in a time machine and go back to the late 1990s. I really wish I could go back to the late 1990s. It'd be a much better place.
The
But
90s were great, yeah.
it's been, yeah, 90s were fantastic. Uh, you dove into the world of TV last time. I really didn't. Um, when you gave me some episodes of The Office to watch,
Yeah.
I decided to dip my toe into the realm of television, and we decided to watch, or I decided to have us watch a few episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, so that's
Uh,
interesting. I didn't realize that The Office was the only show we did. Oh, but we did wrestling, which was
yeah, but that
your
was that
curveball.
was
That was your
te-
curveball. That was,
that
yeah,
was
that was
it
the,
was
yeah.
television, but it was also because it was WrestleMania season. Like it was
Right,
leading up
right,
to
right.
WrestleMania, and I knew, knowing you, I knew there was only like one shot to get wrestling in there at some point.
Yep, that
Like
was
it
it.
wasn't like it was gonna be one and done. There wasn't gonna be like every season we're gonna do a couple matches or anything. It was like we're doing this once, so let's just get this out the way, and
Yeah.
then we won't have to go back to it.
Yeah. So that is yes, that's where we're starting. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Do you want to share your background on Buffy and then I'll share mine, or like
Well, let's go with yours first.
okay.
What do you know of, and what is your experiences with Buffy?
So I couldn't tell you like which ones I had seen. Um but this was a WB show.
Yes.
Later UPN, but it was on WB at first. And that was a channel I would be watching for things like Smallville, one of my favorite shows. Um, and I don't know, like I swear my mom watches all this type of stuff. Like my mom will watch like this type of stuff. So
Dawson's
Buffy, I feel like
Creek.
yeah, Buffy was definitely on. My sister would watch Dawson's Creek. Buffy was definitely something I believe my mom would watch, and I don't think she was like a religious watcher of it, but it'd be like sometimes you walk in, she's watching Buffy. Um, I believe it would have probably been during the original run, not during like syndication. But uh, so that was something I was aware of. Like I was aware of the show, Sarah Michelle Gellar. I knew of the character Angel, right? And then he had his own spinoff. Uh, but like some of the other characters I wasn't as familiar with. Like I think I found out a few years ago Seth Green was in it, and I was shocked because I was like, I don't remember him being in it. So maybe I saw later stuff when he wasn't in it, and then
I
you
think
know
I'm gonna surprise you with somebody who was in an episode of this in a few minutes. But
Allison Hannigan. I knew her more from How I Met Your Mother
yeah,
than Buffy, because I wasn't like a diehard Buffy watcher. But like I definitely knew Sarah Michelle Gellar and Angel, and that was probably the extent of it. I'd seen some episodes, but I don't know. Like I don't know much. I get the lore. I understand it's like a freak of the week type show, right? Most of the time, with some probably bigger mythology stuff sprinkled in. But that's all that I really knew.
so I'm as everyone who listens and watches this knows, I'm a little older than you. So late 90s, I was 18, 19, 20 years old. Just joined the army, out there living my life, doing the thing. Um, and let's be realistic. I am not. the target demographic for this show. Right?
You're not?
I was not then. I'm not now. Um, I remember the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, which we'll talk about in a second. Uh, Campy, kind of fun, but so I knew of it, and then when the show came on, I heard a little bit about it, but once again, it's not really my. It didn't seem like my cup of tea, right? So fast forward to 2004, 2005. Still in the army, getting ready to go on my second deployment. As a matter of fact, I'm in my second deployment um, in Iraq, and someone who at the time was a friend who is no longer a friend. Uh, we're out at one of these little bazaars on our base, and I think I've talked about this before. There's a very thriving bootleg um, movie and DVD business in these
Yes, but
places.
you were never a part of that. You would never watch bootlegs. Casey always got everything legally.
I think that the statute of limitations is well over. So, well, here's the thing: you can't. It's so thriving. We actually have to go through customs before we redeploy back home. We can't take the stuff back, or like and when we if you go to mail stuff off, you can't seal the stuff up. They have to be able to look in the package before you send it back. So you're not supposed to take the stuff back. Some people do. Most of the stuff isn't good quality. Like it's not top quality, right? Like it's usually in like a little plastic sleeve. If you get like a box set, the artwork on it is okay and everything, but it's still not the best quality. And then you can watch it a couple times and it's probably gonna crack or it's not gonna work. Or like me when you get to a series, you'll get halfway through the series, you'll really get into it, and then they start getting out of order or they just stop working, and then you're like, shit, now I gotta go buy the real thing from whoever. So we're in one of these bazaars and uh going through looking through things, and this was one of the ones they had on the shelf. And I be honest, one, I felt a little weird because the time this is about teenage girls and various things, right? And I'm like, I don't need to be watching this. I don't want to watch this. It doesn't seem interesting. And if I did watch it, I need to report myself to Chris Hansen because I'm gonna have to take a seat and get put on a very bad list. The dude was like, no, it's a good show, blah blah blah. And he's like, here's the deal, just buy it. If you don't like it, I'll buy it off you for the same price. And it was like $40. It was like, okay, whatever. Like,
For the whole show?
yeah. Once again, these things are not like obviously you can get it. You can get like the season series of Buffy for like 30, $40 now on Amazon on various sales. But early 2000s when you were still probably paying close to $100 for like a lot of box
No,
sets.
that's a good price. 40 for the whole thing is probably still a good price. I
Also,
would
once
think.
again, you're getting what you pay for. So when you pay $40 for a
Yeah.
box set, 2005, you're gonna get $40 worth of entertainment out of it, not the full 100. But anyway, so get it, bring it home. Started watching it, and I found out, wow, this show is actually really good. The writing is fantastic. Uh, the characters are great, and then as you get to know these characters more and more, and everything develops, you realize, wow, there's in some ways a realistic take on a lot of things in this show. They did a really good job of expressing things. And so much so that there are college classes dissecting Buffy and its interactions with the world and the different allegories that it has and everything about being a teenage girl and trying to live through life and the different things that she's going through and how they use these monsters and various things as metaphors for how she's going through life and everything else. Um, so we're gonna start in the beginning. I really wish. So they used to have a different intro for the first couple of seasons, and I think
Mm.
they stopped sometime in season 3. And there was a voiceover guy. It was like the in-house WB guy for a while, and then it turned into one of the characters, Giles, played by Anthony Stewart Head, who would start every episode saying, "In every generation there is a chosen one. She alone will stand against the vampires, the demons, and the forces of darkness. She is the Slayer." And that's how the episode would always start the first couple of seasons. And then it would go into your cold open and then your intro music and then,
Oh wow.
the story. And then eventually they stopped. Like, and then they kind of shortened, they changed up the guy, then they shortened it, then they just stopped. Because as we know, between needing more time for the show or more time for advertisers in there, like stuff just gets cut. So, it was created, written, directed, and also the executive producer, head writer, and showrunner was Joss Whedon. So now, as a side note,
Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon, and Avengers, Joss Whedon.
yes, as a side note, before we go any further, some people listening to this may have some difficulty with this because of things that have come out about Joss Whedon, and I just want to acknowledge that beforehand. Everyone's gonna have their different thoughts on whatever. That's not my place to tell you what to think. But I find myself having to deal with this recently of trying to separate the art from the artist. As far as, I'm a huge wrestling fan. I grew up in the '80s, and I was a big, big, big Hulk Hogan fan. And then he said some racist things a few years back, but I kind of attributed that to, okay, that was Terry Bollea, the man who is Hulk Hogan, as compared to Hulk Hogan, the wrestler whose theme song is "I'm a Real American, I fight for the rights of every man." And I was able to separate that. I was able to separate Chris Benoit and the horrible things he did to his family by murdering them before he took his own life, and the professional wrestler of Chris Benoit, who was fantastic in the ring. And then the last couple of months happened, and I'm finding it very difficult for me to separate Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. And so I understand some people may hear this and not want to.
Well, and our, like, my generation is dealing with that with J.K. Rowling right now, right?
Yes,
Another
great example.
Like a number one example of this at this point. But for a lot of those kids, or people that grew up with that time, that was their escape, and it was their it was their story. And so it's very tough. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to put that aside, because there's more than just Joss Whedon that worked on this show, right? There's other writers, there's others.
And the biggest thing is some people can separate the art from the artist, some people can't. And I acknowledge it's not an easy choice at all.
Yeah, so maybe not the episode for them if they're listening.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, hey, I'm not, I'm not gonna gloss over that, and especially as other stuff came out about him on this show. But he created it. It's based on the 1992 film that was also written by Joss Whedon of the same name.
But I didn't realize he did the movie.
This is unrelated, other than just the same character of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Premiered March 10th of 1997 on the WB. It ran until May 20th of 2003 on UPN, when eventually they merged channels and whatever weird, funky stuff happened there. I don't know.
Became the CW.
Yeah. So the series follows a young lady named Buffy Summers, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. She's the latest in a succession of women known as vampire slayers. They are chosen by fate to battle against vampires, demons, all these other monsters. She's a teenager. She's like 15, 16 when the series starts. She wants to live a normal life, but she has to learn to embrace her destiny as the series progresses. As the series, like other Slayers, she has what's called a Watcher. That is played by Anthony Stewart Head. Giles, the older British guy on the show. He guides, he teaches, he trains her. Unlike her predecessors, and this is something that you see if you watch the series, she has a set of friends who help her in this endeavor, known as the Scoobies or the Scooby Gang. It takes place in a small, fake Southern California city called Sunnydale. Sunnydale is special because it has what's called a Hellmouth, a portal between this reality and the next, convergence of mystical energies. Because of this, supernatural creatures, beings with magical powers, a lot of that stuff is drawn to Sunnydale or rise below the ground from Sunnydale, and there's a lot of death and murder and horrible things that happen in this small town. Also, side note, there's also Hellmouth in Cleveland in this series, and of course, if you go on to Reddit, which once again, that's another Hellmouth in its own right. But if you go on to Reddit and people discuss it, people from or who live or in or around Cleveland agree that Cleveland has a Hellmouth. I'm not saying it does. I don't live there, but this is just what I've seen from people on Reddit. I'm sure you have some questions, so we'll get to some of those as well. But let's talk about some people. Sarah Michelle Gellar plays Buffy. Nicholas Brendan plays Xander. Allison Hannigan, as you talked about, plays Willow Rosenberg. Anthony Stewart Head plays Rupert Giles, her watcher. James Marsters plays a vampire named Spike. Emma Caulfield Ford plays Anya, Anyanka. We'll talk about her in a little bit. Young Michelle Trachtenberg plays Dawn Summers, Buffy's little sister. Charisma Carpenter plays Cordelia Chase. David Boreanaz plays Angel or Angelus. Seth Green plays Oz. Danny Strong, who has an Emmy, wow, plays Jonathan Levinson. We get a character by the name of Faith, played by Eliza Dushku. Juliet Landau plays a vampire named Drusilla, who's attached up with Spike. Alex Denisoff, the husband of Allison Hannigan, plays Wesley Wyndham Price. They met on this show.
He's also in How I Met Your Mother.
Yes, and he was also the first Thanos. Julie Benz plays Darla. And in season 4, episode 1, a very young Pedro Pascal plays Eddie the Freshman.
That's really cool.
This is like one of his first roles, and you can't even recognize him. Like you can look up the picture of him and everything, and you see him now, and it's like that's Pedro Pascal.
That's why. No, Pedro took a long time to break through. So he talked about maybe quitting before, and he
talked about
got Game of Thrones and blew up.
Well, who's the girl? One of his really good friends would basically share her per diem with him from some of the shows, and that's how he was getting by for a long time.
That's crazy.
So the show gets tons of critical and popular acclaim. It's listed among some of the greatest television series of all time. During its original airing, it would typically get between 4 and 6 million viewers, which nowadays would be fantastic, right?
Nowadays would be really great. But even back then it wasn't super great, but because WB was not one of the main networks, it was good. It was great.
It was a huge success for WB because a lot of people may not know, if we go back even further, for a while there was only 3 networks: ABC, CBS, and NBC. Fox came in the late 80s, early 90s, and kind of disrupted that a little bit with Married with Children, The Simpsons, and a couple other shows. Cops,
and then once they got football, it really took off for Fox. Yeah.
Especially when they were the first ones to start putting like the first down line, the yellow line that we see now. They had hockey for a while. They tried doing something with a glowing puck.
Yes. Yeah.
That's I guess people didn't like. I kind of dug it because I knew where the puck was and I could follow it, but not my thing, and it went away. So, hundreds of time products, novels, comic books, video games, fan films, parodies. Like I said, there's college classes.
I was just reading that last year they did a Audible podcast.
Yeah, they came back for like another one with most of the characters.
Yeah.
It was also part of a big wave of TV series, late 90s, that had strong female characters. Charmed, Xena, Warrior Princess, which I love.
Nowadays, this would be considered woke.
La Femme Nikita, Dark Angel, Alias. And then, as you said, it had a spin-off series known as the Buffyverse. So let's talk about Buffy. Like I said, she's a teenager. She's like 15, 16. Every generation is a woman chosen by fate, right? She gets powers that increases her physical strength, her endurance, her agility, healing, intuition. She gets precognition. She has prophetic dreams. Sounds cool until you realize you're a 16-year-old girl going through this at the same time like 15 and 16-year-old girls are going through what they go through, including high school and trying to figure out their life. The life of a Slayer is pretty lonely typically, I guess, and it doesn't last long. They usually don't make it very long because they're battling demons and vampires. Typically, what happens is eventually they are killed in the line of duty. You don't really get to retire as a Slayer, and then the next one is called into duty. So much so that there are actually multiple Slayers in this series because, spoiler alert, in the end of season 1, Buffy technically dies for a few moments, which then calls the next Slayer into existence. So now there's 2 Slayers. That Slayer's then killed, and that's where Faith, who we see in one of the episodes, comes in. She's a Slayer, but that's how we end up with multiple Slayers at a period of time. So she goes to this high school in the pilot. Her watcher, Rupert Giles, he's not really referred to by his first name a lot, except for
I was gonna say they never called him Rupert, but it's funny because the actor plays Rupert Mannion in Ted Lasso. So
really?
it's yeah, it's funny that you said his name is Rupert in this.
He was more known for a series of Taster's Choice commercials before this. He did a series of coffee commercials, and he's done a lot of stuff in England.
Yeah,
but he's typically at the same time. Remember, he's an adult. He's the librarian at the high school. He's an adult, so children probably aren't going to call adults by their first name, so they just call him Giles. Side note, he has a nickname called Ripper because he was not the best of boys as a young lad. And they go into his story a little bit through some episodes. And when you find stuff out, you're like, what? But it's great. He's a member of the Watchers Council. Their job is to help these train and guide these Slayers. So in the first episode, her secret kind of comes out because she's supposed to keep this a secret from everybody, right? Not everybody's supposed to know. You're a vampire slayer and you're stronger and faster and better than everybody. But somehow, because it's high school and it's television, her secret comes out, and then she makes friends with Willow and Xander, who are not the cool kids in school. Surprise, right? I think now they probably would be more cooler.
yeah.
But 90s, no, they weren't. So she makes friends with them, and then that kind of, they become the Scooby Gang, right? And they go on these adventures together.
And then Sarah Michelle Gellar becomes actually part of the Scooby Gang.
Yes. yes, she does. So Willow, typically she's a very shy, nerdy kind of girl. She's a wallflower. She excels in academics, right? Good contrast to Buffy's outgoing personality and less than stellar educational record. As the series progresses, Willow becomes stronger, more assertive. She starts dabbling into witchcraft, and she becomes a very powerful witch. And she also eventually realizes that she is a lesbian, and she has a same-sex relationship that starts later in the series. Contrast, Xander's just a dude. We'll talk about him in a second. He's literally just a dude. No powers. No super strength. He's not smart. He's just a dude. Yep. He provides comic relief and a grounded perspective. And he was kind of known as like the heart of the Scooby Gang, right? So this show gave us the term the big bad, because the way the show is set up is every season there's one overarching bad guy for that season. It's not like the X-Files where there was an overarching mythology that led throughout the series. Mm-hmm. But each season there was one big bad guy, but there was also a monster of the week. And sometimes they intersected. Sometimes there were certain episodes that just dealt with the big bad. but they had episodes that dealt with stuff as far as like, let's take the Universal monsters. There was an episode with uh basically people putting together a Frankenstein monster, or someone in high school was taking robbing graves, taking body parts to make a person. Um, like a creature from the Black Lagoon. There was sea monsters. It was, as you said, as we talked about, Oz was a werewolf. Dracula himself makes an appearance later in one of the seasons. Um, there was a praying mantis who was trying to sleep with students. She was a very attractive teacher.
She's an insect?
Yes, she was an actual praying mantis, but she took a human form and then was trying to sleep with her students and then kill her. So, uh, so Joss Whedon says, um, a character by Rhonda the Immortal Waitress was the first incarnation of Buffy. The idea that some woman seems to be clearly insignificant turns out to be extraordinary. The early unproduced idea evolved into Buffy, developed into Hollywood in the formula of the little blonde girl who goes into a dark alley and gets killed in every horror movie, which once again Sarah Michelle Gellar later did in I Know What You Did Last Summer. He wants to subvert that idea, create someone who's just a hero. The very first mission of the show was the joy of female power, having it, using it, and sharing it. So he did that with the movie in '92, starring Christy Swanson. They later, a lady named Gail Berman. She was a Fox executive, CEO of a production company who owned the rights to the movie. Goes to Whedon, wants him to develop the Buffy concept into a TV series. She goes, Whedon, you want to do a show? He says, high school is a horror movie. And that's what he starts thinking. And that's how he sold it. Supernatural elements stand in as metaphors for personal anxieties associated with adolescence and young adulthood. It was originally just going to be titled Slayer, but then they changed it.
Good. I don't think it is as popular if it's just called Slayer, but
so the show deals with a lot of stuff, right? So even the aspect that Buffy has to keep the fact that she is a Slayer from her mom. Her mom does not know this until later in the series. So much so in the episode where it comes out, Joyce learns that Buffy's a Slayer. Her reaction becomes that of a parent, especially during that time, that discovering their child might be gay, including going through denial, suggesting, have you just tried not being a Slayer? Right? Ultimately, she kicks Buffy out of the house because of it. And eventually they reconcile and go back. Katie Holmes and Selma Blair were up for the role of Buffy. Natasha Lyonne was offered the role but declining it because she was 16 and didn't want to be in a series at the age of 16. Julie Benz. A bunch of people on the show tried for the role of Buffy, but eventually it went to Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was Kendall Hart on All My Children. She had won a daytime Emmy, so on and so forth. Agent spots David Boreanaz on the sidewalk walking his dog. That's how he gets cast as Angel.
Wow.
Allison Hannigan was the last one to be cast. She done a couple small roles in commercials. So she took the role and kind of made it her own as far as being the wallflower and kind of being a sad sack, but still leaning into it. There was she talked about she auditioned where she did the scene where she's telling Buffy about how her Barbie doll was taken from her as a kid. Buffy asked her if she got it back. Willow's line is most of it. But Allison Hannigan decided to be upbeat about it, saying she got most of it back. Like, yeah, it didn't come back all, like she didn't get it totally back, but she got most of it, and that's better than nothing. And that's kind of how she got the part. Episode lists. Number 2 on Empire's 50 greatest TV shows of all time. And Entertainment Weekly's 50 best teen shows of all time, number 2. Top cult shows ever, 2004-2007 TV Guide, number 3. Um, TV Guide 60 greatest sci-fi shows of all time, number 7. Hollywood Reporter, Hollywood's 100 favorite TV shows, number 27. And Variety, Screen Rant, 101 best written TV series of all time by the Writers Guild of America, number 49. It's in Time Magazine's 100 best TV shows of all time. So it has left a mark on things. Now that we got that out there, season 3, episode 13, the Zeppo. So what do you think of the intro with the werewolf howling and the music and
it seemed, I guess, pretty short compared to the time, right? Like I feel like this time there was a lot of like theme songs that have the whole cast and like, cast pictures, cast names and stuff. It doesn't really do that, right? Like it's a very short intro and then into the show.
So this was from a band called the Nerf Herders, and Allison Hannigan was the one who recommended them to Joss Whedon and got that song. I think it really fits with the show. It is very catchy to me, especially. I think that's one of the first reasons I might have flipping through channels. I might have or I might have left it on the channel and heard the song, and I was like, "What is this?" So the Zeppo, season 3, episode 13, original air date of January 26, 1999. So this episode kind of goes against what a normal episode goes. So the normal episode would follow the Scooby Gang in what's going on in this episode, where there's this big bad or some evil creatures, and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And oh, by the way, that hellmouth I talked about is literally right underneath the school library. It has opened once before. They've closed it, but it's in this episode. People are trying to open it again, right? Normal episode, that's what they're dealing with. And you're following Buffy and Giles and all these people trying to figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to figure all this stuff out, and we're going on their adventures. I love this episode because I was Xander. I was kind of that dorky kid. Especially in high school, people have their things. Some people are good at sports, academics. Some people are just, and like he talks about it in this episode, some people are just cool. Then there's people like Xander, who are just, like I said, he's just a dude. And he's trying to find a way to fit in. And what you see in the beginning of this episode, where after they have the fight with these creatures, Xander, I think, either ran away or got knocked out. That happens a lot throughout the series, right? So much so that even in this episode, when things get really bad, like they don't want him around because they're afraid he's going to get hurt or killed. And I feel for him because it's like he's there, he helps, but he's realizing like he doesn't serve a total purpose with these guys, and he just wants to fit in. So what are your thoughts of this episode so far?
So this one, so I think this is where, as somebody that wasn't too familiar with the characters and their roles, that I think that like subversion gets lost on me in this one, right? Like, it wasn't until later on in the episode that I started picking up on it, because I think you had mentioned it last year or earlier this year when we were talking about potentially doing Buffy. I think you may have mentioned there was an episode where it kind of focuses on, or I read it online somewhere, I can't remember, but like where it focuses on Xander like doing stuff, and he's actually the reason that everything ends up fine, but like Buffy and her friends don't even notice because they're taking care of their own like things, right? And that he doesn't bring it up. He doesn't really, like, nobody will know at the end of the day that he did all of this stuff, right? I think for like first time watching the show in years and not really knowing the character roles, it
This
was a
may not have
little.
been the best episode to start with.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'll spoil this part. This is the least favorite of the three out of the ones we watched. Like this is the one I would put bottom. Now maybe if I had more appreciation of or like knew the stuff um from other episodes building up to this, where that's a fun, like, because I know there's shows like that for me, right? Like that I like, that there's maybe an episode that does a little flip on the head for it, and then I'm like, oh, I really enjoyed that because it's something that we don't usually get, but like maybe lost on like you if you haven't seen it, right? So
Yeah, I
maybe if I
wasn't
go back,
realizing.
yeah,
I didn't realize until right now, literally, that I'm like, this may not have been the best episode to start on because, yeah, like he doesn't know these people, and like it's hard enough jumping into the middle of a series when characters are already
right, right.
established and everything. And we talked about it before, where we really didn't want to start with a pilot episode because characters change and kind of develop over time. But
I think it really depends on the pilot. Like if I
yeah,
was going to show somebody Lost, like I have to start with the
you have
pilot,
to show
right?
the
Like
pilot.
yeah,
Yeah,
you have to show the pilot. But if like a show like this, which becomes like a monster of the week, freak of the week, in Smallville we say freak of the week, but um, you know, that's that's the type of thing that needs to be uh you need these episodes too during those runs that flip it around, so that way like your hardcore viewers that are watching every week get a little taste of something different,
yeah.
instead of the same thing. No, so I think I was also a little thrown off at the beginning because like I didn't know. Okay, so I have some questions. So
Okay.
was this one completely standalone, like the thing at the beginning, like because we come in at the end of another event, right? And it's like showing that Xander knocked out, like, right, he's fine, everybody's worried about him, he's fine,
Yeah,
and that's the setup.
this is
That's the setup,
completely
the premise.
standalone episode. There's really
There's
no
no hints
time.
of like the big bad in this or
No,
anything.
no, this one
Okay,
this one doesn't.
so that's what I wasn't knowing, like, because when they're showing like you know Giles with Buffy and stuff, and it's like them talking like what some people would say like techno babble, but in this sense is more like demon babble, right? Of
Yeah,
like stuff that's going on. I'm like, I don't know if this is stuff that's playing into the larger plot or not.
no, completely standalone just by itself. Just
Okay. Second question. What is Charisma Carpenter's character's deal?
okay,
That's what I didn't get from her, because she's like very anti Xander, and then like does she know that they're doing the slaying stuff? Like
okay.
does she like
So
what is her
I'm
deal?
glad you brought this up because this is great. So she's at the beginning of the series. She is the cool kid in the high school, right? She's the queen bee,
Okay.
right? So much so that actually in the pilot episode, her and Buffy kind of get along. But then, as
When Buffy
Buffy,
starts hanging out with the freaks, like she's less
but
inclined.
she makes the choice to hang out with the freaks, because she doesn't like how
Yeah.
Cordelia, Charisma Carpenter's character, is treating them. Um, and she doesn't totally know what's going on initially. Eventually, she kind of through whatever methods finds out. Eventually, at some point, her and Xander start dating or hooking up on the sly, right?
So it's before this.
No, this is, yeah, before this,
Okay.
her and Xander were hooking up secretly. Then they came out publicly and they were together. Like they were actually a couple. They were together. And then something happened and she caught Xander kissing Willow, right? And some bad things happened. So obviously they split up. So there is some tension between her and
Okay.
Xander. Uh,
I was gonna say she just came across as a big hater. Like,
she's bitchy. She's very bitchy in this episode.
she's
She
like,
was a lot.
"What are? Oh,
She
you're
was
going
a,
to get them donuts." You know?
but because she knew what his role was, because yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
she was part of the Scooby Gang for a while, and she knew like everyone had a role, and like
Right, right.
she even talked about it, like Willow's the witch and Buffy's the Slayer, and you get donuts. Like, so she was part of that world for a while, and then it changed, and then she's no longer in that world, but she still knows what's going on.
And she
And
goes to Angel later. Like she leaves Buffy and goes to Angel.
yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But so at for whatever reason, other people in this world are oblivious to like vampires and demons. They don't understand, or they just refuse to acknowledge all the weird stuff that is happening. But Cordelia is fully in the know. So yeah, she makes reference to calls him the Zeppo, reference to Zeppo Marks. She also makes reference to him being Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that's a reference you can get.
Yes, yeah.
Just a sidekick, a dude without any powers. And yeah, that's it. So yeah, that eventually, when at the end of season 3, when Angel moves to his own show, he moves to Los Angeles, and gets his own show. Cordelia, after graduating high school, because that's when season 3 ends, after they graduate high school, she ends up moving to LA and running across Angel, and then I think they start a detective agency, and she ends up working for him down there. But then she eventually starts getting her own powers, and some other weird things happen. And let me say this: I'm not well versed in the Buffy lore. I have, in fact, not seen the entire series. I've seen most of it, but every time I sit down to watch it, go through, other shows come up where life gets in the way, and I can't start like pick a show back up like after 3 years in the middle of season 6. I'm the kind of person who's got to start it from the beginning. But there's 7 seasons, and this is back when there were 22 episode seasons.
Did you watch Angel? Did you watch Angel or no?
Some of it, but once again, never got around to finishing. It's something I need to. This was actually a mid-season replacement, so the first season was only 12 episodes.
Right. Yeah, that's
but
what
after that, there was like the 22, 23, 24.
The good old days. Oh, the good old days when TV shows had 22 episodes a season, and we got character development.
Yeah.
Like this episode would not exist in today's streaming.
This would have been this 8, 10, 12 episode thing. This would have been skipped over.
Yep.
So let's talk about Angel real quick. Yeah, she goes to see Angel. So once again, I was not in the prime demographic for this show, right? So Angel is a vampire, but he in the lore of this show, when a person turns to a vampire, they lose their soul, and that's how they're able to do these evil things and have no remorse. Angel got his soul back, and that's how he is kind of the good guy. So what happened is, he's born Liam in 18th century Ireland. He becomes a vampire. He assumes the name Angelus. He becomes infamous as being one of the most sadistic vampires in all of European history. He angers and kills a daughter of a Romani clan. They curse him by giving him his soul back. It gives him great torment, and he's able to see the people he's killed and acknowledge what he's done. So that allows him to resist the impulses of being a vampire. He still has to drink blood because he's a vampire, so on and so forth. Later in life, when he gets to California, someone comes to him and they have him help Buffy. This is where it gets weird because he's over 200 years old. Buffy's 16, 17. Right off the bat, some problematic stuff.
Well, anytime you're dealing with vampires, it's problematic.
But also because
they're always old. Yeah, I know. I'm saying, but they're always old, and they always end up liking these youngins. So, I mean, like Twilight, right? Like I haven't
Twilight's
watched
another
it,
one.
But I mean, like I think he's old in that too.
Plus,
I think
Twilight
just Dracula even
vampires. It's just wrong. But
yeah.
But so at some point, he helps Buffy. Comes in later in season 1 that he's a vampire. Like, she doesn't know it at first. He's just like this brooding, good-looking dude. Comes out the shadows to help her. Whatever. So they have the hots for each other. They don't act on it for a while. Eventually they do. And then one night, horrible things happen. They make love. What he doesn't know was he will lose his soul if he ever experiences one true moment of happiness.
Hmm.
When they make love, that is his one true moment of happiness. He turns back into Angelus. I loved this portion of the show because A, I wasn't with all the sappy love story stuff. B, he was horrible and sadistic, and I thought it just made for great television. Like it was bad, and it was probably some of my favorite portions of the show. And then eventually, they gave him he got his soul back, but he ended up going to hell for several centuries, which was only a few months in our time, but in demon time it was several centuries. It was torture down there. Then hell spat him back out, and he came back. But because he did such horrible things to people around, they didn't trust him for a long time. And it wasn't until later on that eventually they began to trust him more. But they're still kind of skeptical of him because, once again, like he went so far, I'll spoil this. Giles had the hots for one of the teachers at the school, right? And they were starting to get together. And I think the teacher was starting to get a little, I can't remember if she was starting to know what was going on with Buffy or not. Actually, she was, because she was sent there to watch over Angel because she was a member of this Romani clan. She was sent there specifically to make sure that Angel never experienced that moment of happiness, because otherwise he would lose his soul back into
Professional cock blockers, what you're saying.
Yes, that's a prime example. But she failed at that mission, right?
She was too busy with Giles, right?
Well, Angel became probably the best cockblock in history because he ends up killing this character by the name of Jenny Calendar. He kills her in the school, right? And what is so bad is Jenny had made so her and Giles kind of go out of favor because her secret came out to them as far as what she knew and what she was trying to do and what she failed doing. So Giles' first loyalty is to Buffy and what he's doing there, right? But they finally were able to make amends, and they were going to have a romantic night together. It was going to be very romantic. It's going to be a first time for them to be romantic. So Angel kills her, takes her back to Giles' place. Giles comes to his house, doesn't know any better, opens the door, there's candles, there's flower petals leading every place. And he's like, all right, this is going to happen. Yeah. He goes up to the bedroom. Angel broke her neck. He didn't even bother to feed from her. He just broke her neck and killed her. And then laid her in Giles' bed.
Wow.
And that was specifically done. Joss Whedon talked about he specifically killed her off because he wanted everyone to know that nobody was safe. Like, she was starting to become a major character in the show, but he didn't want to feel like anybody could just rest on their laurels.
So George R.R. Martin before George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, he because I had the box set of this, and I've seen some of the behind the scenes stuff. We talked about that specifically, like nobody was safe. Also in this episode, we get Faith, played by Eliza Dushku. I said Faith is another Slayer. She was called into action after Kendra, a Jamaican Slayer who was called up after Buffy died for a moment, was killed. So now there's two Slayers. Well, there really shouldn't be two Slayers, but it's just how things work when someone gets brought back to life.
So Xander, hold on. Before you said with like Giles and stuff that there's like a order, right? That is to help the Slayers and stuff.
Yes.
So who gives these divine powers to the Slayers? So there's nobody that could be like, oh, we have two, like, let's remove the powers from one. Like
that might be explained either in the outside lore of like the comic books and books, or it might be explained later on because, well, I haven't seen it. At some point during season 7, some weird stuff happens, and everybody who is slated to be called as a Slayer ends up there together to take on, I think, what's called like the first evil or something like that. So I don't know how it happened, but in this world there are alternate dimensions, and there's I can't really explain a lot of that. So bottom line is, I'm not sure. But like I said, technically Buffy dies in part of season 1, and Xander has to bring her back to life. But that's not brought up until sometime in season 2 when Kendra shows up and she's another Slayer.
Right.
And then that's when they all realize, wait a minute, well, technically Buffy did die. And even Buffy's like, well, maybe I can just like sit back and retire. And Giles is like, it's kind of not really how it works. Like, you're still a Slayer, still have the powers. Like, you still kind of got to do the job. Like, kind of like at a normal job. Like, we brought someone else in, but you still got to do your job. And then Kendra's killed. Faith comes into play. But Faith is a bad girl. And she's a wild child. She's ran away from her watchers and various things. Somehow she gets called to the Hellmouth in Sunnydale. So Xander saves her at some point, and as you see, Faith is living in a shady motel. That's the best way to put it. I don't know. But she's got some pent up things going on. She takes it out on Xander. Xander loses his virginity in this episode.
Yeah, that was what a shock.
Buffy loses hers earlier in the series as well as Cordelia, but and then so that, like I said, we got people bringing dead people out of the ground, right? So we got a bunch of dead people who are still living because there's witchcraft and things going on. There's a bomb in the basement of the school that the rest of the Scoobies have no clue about.
Yeah.
That Xander saves them from, right? That's kind of the episode.
Yeah.
Quick side note. There was an episode that happened to fall, and this comes at a really weird time to even bring this up. There was an episode that got delayed because it happened to coincide with an actual school shooting where Buffy gets, I think, like a demon's blood gets on her and she becomes able to hear people's thoughts. And one of the things that she hears is that this time tomorrow, they'll all be dead or they'll all be sorry. And it deals with a character climbing a clock tower in the school. And she thinks he's going to start a school shooting. It actually ends up being he was going to kill himself. But they had the episode filmed and it was primed. And then the shooting happened. And then they had to pull the episode for a while.
Wow.
Because of just unfortunate events. Once again, as we're dealing with that like I realize that's also unfortunate, but the show did have to deal with some things like that. Not much else to talk about Zeppo. I thought it was a fun little episode just because it took one of the
some
other
actors.
Characters.
I recognized the jock who's dead. The one that's trying to blow up the school or whatever. I forget where I know him from, but I looked at his IMDb. And then, of course, the guy he resurrects first thing is Michael Cudlitz, who is like he was in Walking Dead. He's in Superman and Lois as Lex Luthor. He's been in a whole bunch of stuff. So I can't hear you. Are you muted?
The big block-headed guy with like the Letterman jacket or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff. So I saw his name in the credits, and then once he popped out of the grave, I was like, oh, okay, there he is.
All right, so you said this is probably number 3 of the episode.
Yeah.
Which, fair enough. I like I said, didn't realize till after dealing with it. It might not be. Up next, season 4, episode 10, Hush. Air date December 14th of 1999. Excuse me. When everyone in Sunnydale loses their voices, the Scooby Gang must silently solve the mystery of the monsters who stole their ability to speak. This episode might be one of my favorite episodes of television that I have ever seen. It is so these shows are 44 minutes long, give or take 43 and a half, 44 minutes, something like that. I timed it 27 minutes and 11 seconds of no dialogue. Yet they told a totally coherent story and kept me enthralled the entire time.
Kids these days would hate this episode because they can't look at their phone and watch the show at the same time.
I wouldn't even say kids. I think people these days, because
True.
you have to watch this, because this might be, I think, one of the best things Joss Whedon has ever done. There's only about 17 minutes of dialogue in the entire show.
So I had some questions with this this
Okay.
one. Okay. One of them is a little facetious. Okay. One of
Okay.
them's not a real question.
Go ahead.
this
I
this
do this myself.
college, this college that they're going to. There's no commuters from out of the city that can speak. Like they arrived. I would love to scene like that where a kid arrives. He's a commuter and he's just like, "What's going on, guys?" And nobody can talk to him. Like that would have been a great scene.
You know what? You're right. There's definitely some things. There's definitely some things up until the CDC quarantines the town, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There's definitely some things that would. Also, this is one of those episodes. This is kind of like a lot of horror movies now, where they say a lot of it couldn't be done because of modern conveniences such as cell phones, right?
You just be texting.
But there's a lot of things that this episode like just wouldn't be able to work because of modern technology.
I just think it's also funny how, not to get too far ahead here, but how quickly this takes place over the course of a day, right?
Couple of days, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this one was like a day that they solved this, but they go from finding out they can't speak to then walking the street, and somebody already had the bright idea of, I'm selling whiteboards. Like this guy gets out of bed, realizes he can't speak, has a stack of whiteboards, and is like, I'm selling these. $10 a pop.
Look, that's capitalism at its best, baby. Like,
and then you already have the church and the priest and stuff doing the things. I'm like, these people went quick into revelations.
oh, look. I am not a religious person, and I'm not knocking anybody's religion, except for Scientologists. I'm gonna knock you guys till the day I die. But some of the religious zealots are going to come out as soon as something bad happens.
Yes, yeah.
So, like, that just is.
That was funny.
Yeah.
But the no, I like that they had like the news report come in and like kind of, because I was wondering, like, is anybody going to be able to, like, you know, they had to get across the point that some people will think this is a hoax. They say that in the news report, right? Oh, this is just like a town pulling a trick on us. And there's also these reports that they've all had laryngitis, right? Is the way that they're explaining it to the mass population out there. But thought that was cool. And then, of course, getting them the whiteboard so that way they can actually start telling us and the audience. The audience and the other characters the plot points that we need to know to get this across. So, and this is when we're introduced to Willow's love interest, right? Like,
yes, this is actually the very first appearance of Amber Benson as Tara.
Yeah, interesting. Because then, like, next episode when they're for sure an item, I was like, oh, lucked out that last episode was her intro.
So, Joss Whedon claims he wrote this as a challenge to himself. Critics had hailed him for his deft use of banter and witty dialogue and wordplay, so he wanted to see if he was good enough of a writer to craft a script which was largely lacking any dialogue at all. The cast found that the gentleman actors in makeup and costume were just terrifying in broad daylight. Whedon admitted that he was impressed by the physical movements of the people who played the gentleman, that he stopped mocking mimes by about 40% after the episode was filmed. The appearance of the gentleman was so intimidating, the cast would avoid them between takes. Only a guy by the name of Mark Lucas, who played Riley, would interact with him. Amber Benson's mother was on set because I think she was a teenager at the time.
Oh, wow.
But she asked them to stay away from her daughter. She said she felt bad because no one else would eat lunch with the actors who were playing the gentleman during their breaks.
That is so wild. Like like you have to know that these are people in makeup. Like relax a bit.
So, uh, so we're in season 4. The first 3 seasons take Buffy through high school.
Yep.
End of
That
season 3.
first thing I noticed in this, right, is when she mentions it's community college or a college, right?
The end of season 3, they literally blow up the high school.
Oh, really?
Yes, something like everybody who's probably ever went to high, and I think they even mentioned that. Something like everybody who's ever went to high school would love to do. They blow up the high school at the end of season 3 because the mayor's actually like a demon, and they have a big fight with him. That's okay. So now Buffy goes to college, and she goes through typical things that someone going to college would have to go through. She moves into the dorm, and she has a roommate who seems cool at first, and then all those quirks of your roommate start getting on your nerves. And including like her roommate playing Cher's Believe over and over and over and over again on the loop. And marking stuff in the fridge and so on and so forth. And then eventually she finds out her roommate was a demon from like another dimension. And then Willow ends up being her roommate. But once again, she's trying to balance Life of a Slayer with now Life of a college student. What she doesn't know is this college also harbors a secret. There's a group called the Initiative, which is actually headed by one of her professors, Professor Maggie, I think is her name, and the TA of one of her professors, Riley, and his friend there, the black dude, who are part of like this government organization who help hunt monsters and werewolves and weird things, and so on and so forth. I'm sure that was a question you probably had. I probably beat you to that.
Yeah. Because so when this episode opens up and she has like the dream of her like kissing him and then like the sun going down and then seeing the gentleman, I was lost at that point. So you said before, I didn't realize she had like the ability to maybe like have dreams or see stuff. So was that because of that, or was it something with the guy, or
No, this
like
was just her Slayer abilities giving her like a prophetic dream.
okay? I was because I didn't know that, I was very suspicious of the guy.
Oh, look, I'll say this: you have every right to be suspicious of the guy.
Okay.
And I think so this is episode 10. By this point, like they slowly started to show and hint at what he does. But so what you know what this turns into, as we see later, this turns into a Mr. and Mrs. Smith thing.
Oh, okay.
As you see later, they both have this secret from each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you watch this episode, you can kind of tell they both have an attraction to each other.
Yes.
They can't communicate, and as this episode opens perfectly, where the professor's talking about communication. It's not always words, but just communicating between people. They can't communicate to each other what they need to communicate. And going to the end, Joss Whedon said he loved ending a show about silence with two people having so much to talk to each other about, yet they still can't find the words to communicate with each other when their voices come back. So the episode even still ends on silence because they get together, they realize they have to talk to each other about some stuff because they're holding stuff back. And the last words to say to each other is, "We need to talk." Yeah, I guess we need to talk. And then the episode ends, they still can't find the words to talk to each other. So Buffy has this dream, and this little girl. There's always a creepy kid with a nursery rhyme. So like, if you have a dream about that, like, so about the gentleman, they need 7. They need 7 hearts. The gentlemen are these very long, creepy characters who come into a town, steal people's voices. They take 7 hearts from people, and then they move to the next town. And like, how do you communicate with each other when you can't talk? So, this is your introduction to Spike, the vampire with the like little blonde, spiky hair, obviously. This is your introduction to Anya, who is Xander's. She doesn't know where she is at this point, but she eventually becomes Xander's girlfriend and then fiance.
Hmm.
Um, Weird thing, and this will tie into the next episode. Anya used to be named Anyanka. She's not human, or she was not human. She was what was called a vengeance demon. She would go out, and women who would wish vengeance upon like their significant others, she would allow them to achieve that. So remember how I talked about how Cordelia had that bad incident with Xander where he cheated on her and everything?
Yeah.
So after Cordelia got healed up from her accident and went back to school, um, Anya was in her class or whatever, and Cordelia realized that none of anything would have happened if Buffy Summers had never came to Sunnydale. So she made a wish that Buffy had never came to Sunnydale. Anya granted that wish and showed what life would have been like, basically like a It's a Wonderful Life type thing.
Right.
Except
Right.
bad. Showed what life would have been like had Buffy never came to Sunnydale, and it would have been horrible. Vampires would have overrun the town, and I think that's where we find out that Cleveland has a Hellmouth, so on and so forth. But somehow it backfires, and her amulet or whatever gets broken, and then Anya's forced to live her life as she's like 1,600 years old or something, like 2,000 years old. But she's forced to live and become a 16, 17-year-old human and live out her life starting from there.
Yeah, did not get that in this episode at all. It was, I think, the next one where she mentions being like old and not
Confused.
dealing with this stuff, and I was
And
like,
confused
oh,
and not
okay.
understanding what's going
Yeah.
on. Yeah. But this is why her character is just very blunt, because she's basically like a child at times, because she's a human, she's in a human body, but her mind isn't up there. She just totally doesn't understand some things. And we deal more with that in the next episode we talk about. But she's having issues trying to deal with human emotions with Xander, and wanting to be more with Xander, but Xander not wanting to admit his feelings for her or whatever, right? And as he calls it, or she calls it, his orgasm friend, right? And Giles has an orgasm friend coming over, so Spike has to go live with Xander for a little bit. So Spike is tied up in this because he's a vampire, but this organization, the Initiative, has put a chip in his head and won't let him do bad things. And somehow he escaped. But they don't trust, like, the Scooby Gang there doesn't trust Spike. So even though he says, like, he can't, and they've seen that, like, he can't bite people, like, he can't do any of these bad things, they still don't trust him in certain ways, right? Because he's still a vampire, and he's also had run-ins with them and done horrible things to them, including fought them on many, many occasions. So, but he's also turned around to help them because he's just like causing havoc. So, but so I'm a huge horror movie, and I don't think this would work as a movie, but just the entire aspect of this intrigued me. Of
Well,
what
A
would
Quiet
happen?
Place, right?
You know what? I need to watch. I have those. I need to watch them because
I haven't watched them, but I from what I understand, most of the movie, right, is silence because they can't make a sound. But
this very well could be. Maybe they kind of got the idea for this. I don't know, but um, but the I, the difference is, I think with that is they can make sound and still talk, but there's repercussions if they do. Like one of the things, every
true.
listicle thing I've seen online is talked about. I guess in the beginning of the movie, it shows like they're in a grocery store, and one of the scenes as they're going through the grocery store shows like all the bags of potato chips haven't been touched, because the bags and then the chips themselves will make noise when they eat it, and that will cause these creatures to come out. As compared to their voices in this have been stolen.
Right, right.
And you get some wacky things where when Giles is kind of doing his little, this would have been a PowerPoint presentation now as compared to what we had to deal with in the 90s.
Slides, yeah.
So yeah, this was our PowerPoint presentation in the 80s and 90s, kids. Like
yes.
This is what we had to get.
No, this
right?
part is probably the funniest part because then there's the when Buffy's
The
miming stabbing
mannerisms,
him,
yeah.
and it looks like she's jerking him off or whatever, and then she has to
They're just
grab the
looking at her like,
knife
what?
to be like that, and they're
Oh,
like,
that was a
oh,
wooden stake. She carries
well,
a
yeah,
wooden
whatever,
stake
yeah.
around her. So, but yeah, like yeah, she's like, oh, and they're like, oh, okay. But so yeah, this is like I said, they're communicating with each other, doing these things, and then like I said, we have a Mr. and Mrs. Smith situation where her and Riley's secrets end up coming out to each other by accident, and now they realize like, oh, you've been hiding something from me. Oh, you've been hiding something from me. So what do we do? Um, I just I had heard about this episode before I ever saw it. I heard it was like groundbreaking, and I heard great things. And I was like, I was one of those people who was skeptical because I heard so much about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this can't be as good as people are saying it is. And then when I watched it, I was like, wow, this was one of the best hours of TBS. So what are your thoughts on Hush?
Man, the gentlemen, I guess, were very scary. But also at times, very camp in the sense of like when they're floating around, it almost looks like they're on segways. Like the way that they're moving, it just looks very like segways. And what they kind of look Mr. Burns-esque with their hands as they're
He was Mr. Burns was one of the
awesome. The one guy who played one looked very familiar to me, and I was going through trying to
Doug
find,
Jones.
yeah, Doug Jones, yeah, and that's who it was that I had to go through and figure out where I'd seen him in. But um, he was great. This one worked more for me than the last one because of like this felt like your standard Buffy episode. The only thing I'll say is as we're jumping 3 seasons here, right? Each time, it's like just that first 5 minutes of trying to acclimate to the new status quo,
Yeah.
of like, okay, they're in college. Okay, this is her love interest this season, right? Like, okay, this is, trying to adjust. Is like the little wiggle each time we start a new episode. But then once settled in, this episode I thought was really really cool. This reminds me a lot of, I'm not like a big case of the week type of guy when it comes to procedurals, but like when it comes to this type of stuff with dealing with like Buffy or like Smallville, who did Freak of the Week, or um those type of shows, I feel like I Fringe did like these type of case of the weeks, but they were, little almost like X-Files, right? That type of stuff I think works for me more than like procedurals, which I used to watch a lot, but then I'd kind of get bored. But like I think what really works well for these type of shows is that you do usually have some larger story going on, whether if it's
Mm-hmm.
just the characters, whether it's a big bad or whatever. And then you can have these episodes throughout the course of the season that has these uh, moments. So this show really reminds me of Smallville, and I know it should probably be vice versa because Smallville came a little after. But what I mean by that is like the vibe of watching it, because you'll have these episodes where you're like, oh, it's the episode with this, right? Like I think when you were talking about this, you said like the episode where they can't talk, right?
Yeah.
And I can't off the top of my head think if Smallville has an episode like this, but they have episodes like this in the sense where you're like, oh, the one where uh this twist of the thing happens, right?
The
Like
one where
kind of
they
like,
switch bodies or
yeah,
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's happened in Smallville a couple times, right? So you're like,
Which
oh
they
yeah,
have in Buffy. Her and Faith switch bodies at some point.
yes. And I was listening to a Smallville podcast and they have Buffy fans on there, and there was an episode I was listening to where Smallville had did something and Buffy had did something similar, and they were kind of comparing the two, and I forget what the premise was, but regardless, kind of similar like that. And I feel like Just the type of stuff again that just doesn't happen nowadays. I feel like Supernatural, which I didn't watch, was probably the last of these type of shows for quite a while. Um, overarching plot, but also having these case of the weeks that have a monster of the week that can do this type of stuff. So this episode worked pretty well as a standalone, I think. Just kind of coming in and only have seen watching one before this.
All right. Let's move on to something a little heavier.
And I'm holding on to my ranking for the last 2 episodes until the end, so that way we don't spoil that going into it. But
last episode, The Body, season 5, episode 16. Air date of February 27th, 2001. Buffy, Dawn, and their friends deal with the aftermath of Joyce's death. Once again, I'm realizing these may not have been. These are great episodes. And as someone who's seen these are probably some of my favorite ones, and they're great. But now I'm realizing, like, to have someone jump in and watch these episodes, they won't totally get the reasons that I enjoyed them. Because, like you said, they're not totally. They're more lost because they don't have the context behind everything. So.
Well, what I'll say before you say anything about that, I will say I read the description before this, which I don't actually think mentioned Joyce. I think it said they like a
the aftermath
like on Hulu,
of a loss or something like that.
Yeah. I think Hulu is like somebody close to the
they experienced a loss of somebody close to them or something like that.
But what I'll say is, this was one I could not get spoiled on. Like if it had said Joyce, I had no clue who Joyce was. That like if I had read that, I would have been like, all right, Joyce dies. Like I don't know who that is, and so it's still
who the hell is Joyce?
Yeah. So like that was a good thing in the sense of like when I turned it on, I'm not like I still had no clue who the body was. So that really worked for me.
All right. So what you don't know is that this picks up with the last scene from the previous episode. The last scene of the episode prior to this one is Buffy coming in the house, saying something, asking like, okay, once again, we didn't have cell phones in the 90s, right? So when people came into a house, like Joe Rogan did a comedy skit on this, like people yelled a lot, like, Mom, I'm home. Yes, Honey, I'm home. Yeah. Hey, is anybody here? Like that's how people communicated back in the day. So it's literally the last scene from the previous episode. Buffy goes in the house, looks for her mom, sees the bouquet, looks for her mom upstairs. I think she sees her mom on the couch and is like, Mom, or whatever. And that's how the episode ends. And then this episode picks right up, but it doesn't give you the previously on. It just literally picks up from that scene.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that was good in my opinion. Like I didn't know that, but I felt like the way that it opened worked pretty well.
Okay, I probably have mentioned this to you before, right? But I don't know. Did you notice anything specific about this episode?
No, I'm trying to think now.
Did something feel weird other than Joyce dying in the dead body? Did something feel weird about this episode? Or like as you watched it, like something, like obviously you were able to capture what's going on, blah blah blah, but you're still like,
no, I don't think I didn't pick up on anything.
Okay, the episode only features diegetic sound. We didn't explain music comforts the audience. He wanted
so no music,
to be touching and horrifying, and he didn't want the audience to know how to feel. There's absolutely no music in this episode.
Wow, no, I didn't realize that. But now it makes sense when I'm playing it back in my head a bit. Yeah.
So the first time I watched this, I watched this sometime in the mid 2000s or whatever. I don't know. Wasn't on streaming yet. I was watching it on either my bootleg discs or the real season that I have. I can't remember. Um, but also we didn't have all the stuff we have now where you can like look up to see what's going on in every episode and basically have like you could probably look up on Wikipedia like what the walkthrough of what happens in every episode. But wasn't doing it. So I watched this episode and then something felt off about to me the whole episode. I couldn't figure out what it was. And it wasn't until later, like when I read something about it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we'll go back to my first tour in Iraq. Once again, all these merchants and things had some not by legal discs of movies. So this was 2003. Which Hulk movie was it that came out then? Was it the Hulk or the Incredible?
Ang Lee Hulk, yes.
Yeah. So we got a copy of Ang Lee's Hulk, right? And we're watching it, and something was off in this movie. And if you ever get any movies from means like this, sometimes they don't always have all the practical effects. They're not always in a finished condition. Visually, this one had everything. This movie also did not have any background.
No score,
music, anything like that. And like, I had to stop watching halfway through because I'm like, something was just off with it. And they're like, oh no, you're just being weird. That's how the movie's supposed to be. Then we ended up watching the actual movie later, and everybody I was watching was like, oh, that makes a big difference. And you don't think about something like that until it's taken away from you. That, yeah, the score, the things that go along with this give you notes on what's going on. They tell you how to feel. They can give you a hint of something bad is coming up or evil, or someone's intention, and along with other visual cues. I think he did a good job with this. Whedon said he wanted the scenes to be long, which is why there's the Christmas dinner scene. But other than that, there's 4 scenes in the movie, or I'm sorry, in the show. He stated he wanted to capture how time feels stuck when you have grief, and they even went so far as with the paramedics. They framed them, shot them out of focus on purpose.
That's what I was wondering, because like the one you only see them from like the nose down,
or like yeah.
But I had also heard that this show was kind of reformatted from 4:3 aspect ratio to 16:9 for like streaming sometimes. I didn't know if some of that was just, how like some of the Simpsons gags are cut off that way. So I didn't know if it was part of that.
Or with some shows, you end up seeing so much more in the scene. Like you can see it stand-in.
Yes, like in Friends.
Lights. You can see some lights of the and boom mics and stuff.
On some of the HD stuff of Friends now, because they took like the film, and instead of just like widening it, they actually used they actually just show more of what was filmed, and you can see kind of like the edge of the set in some shots because of that. Yeah, so I didn't know if it was something like that or
no. Okay. You were seeing what Joss Whedon and the cinematographer wanted you to see.
That was my first thought.
It was used to convey that many important people are present during the end of life process, but for a lot of people, it's hard to focus on them or remember who they are. Whedon praised the performance of the 2 actors who were only ever briefly in view. 4 scenes: Buffy's house, Dawn's school, Willow's dorm room,
hospital,
and the hospital. And like I said, according to Whedon, it was done to fully capture how long time can feel during the grief process. And one thing that struck me immediately was Buffy became a child almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
She starts off with like mom, and then immediately when she goes to mommy, like, this is one of the more powerful people on the planet because of what she has to do. physically, mentally, emotionally. She has to carry this huge burden and deal with so much. And she's helpless. It's one of the few times in her life she's been totally helpless because her mom is dead right in front of her. And they even get some things right so far as when she goes to do CPR on her mom.
And breaks the rib.
She breaks a rib and she freaks out because she doesn't know what it is. And she freaks out because she may have had a CPR class earlier in life, but she's like, I don't know if I can remember. She's trying to remember how to put this all together. And then things come to her at weird spots, like, oh, I have to call Dawn. Or, I have to tell Dawn, let me call Giles. But these things don't come in a normal progression of, like, I have to do this. Like, they just come to you because that's when it hits you in that moment. And it's hard to deal with.
So
And
I have a couple quick questions when you're done that.
go ahead.
Okay. So Giles and her mom, did they become a thing? Like, is that what that was?
So, remember how I told you Giles had like a bad side to him? Right?
Yeah.
He dabbled in some wizardry and various other things and some witchcraft back when he was younger in England, right? So
Yeah.
there was this character called Ethan that came over. That came over from England who was Giles' old running buddy. Giles had the nickname of Ripper, right?
Like Jack the
And
Ripper.
I think so. And they were actually looking at doing a spin-off on that, but it just never got off the ground. So at some point, you know how kids in school go around selling candy to raise money for
Yeah,
you
yeah.
probably did in school, right? Candy bars for $1 a piece, and now they're probably like $5. But, so at some point, the school got some candy from what was his buddy's name? Anyway, from his
Ethan?
buddy Ethan. Yeah, he got some candy from Ethan, and he had put some magic spells on the candy or whatever. And Giles and Joyce hooked up a few times. Nobody knew this. Audience knew it, but nobody knew this.
Okay.
And then remember when I told you that Buffy had got spilled on her from a demon and she was able to read people's minds?
Yeah, yeah. That's when she finds out?
That's when she finds out that Giles and her mom had hooked up like on top of her car twice or so, like 2 or 3 times. They did some things. So that was where there was a comment in there where she said, as long as you two stay away from the band candy. Which obviously you wouldn't know that, right? But anybody who had watched the show, and yeah, if you can you can tell like a weird little thing between them, but also
yeah,
when everything first came out, I want to say it's at the end of season 2. Buffy has to come out to her mom, and she brings out that she's a Slayer, and that Giles and Buffy had been keeping the secret from Joyce, which is Buffy's mom. I want to say at the beginning of season 3, Giles is still checking in on Joyce because Buffy runs away from home. He said Joyce tells her, you either have to stop doing this, or if you walk out the door, don't come back. So Buffy, she goes somewhere else, and they're still trying to find her, and Giles is still checking in on her. And at one point, Giles gives her the standard, you shouldn't blame yourself for something like this. And Joyce is like, no, I don't. I blame you. So they had a little tension for a while because she's like, you and my daughter have had this secret and kept me out of this part of her world for so long. And then eventually Buffy comes back. And then they try and do the typical parent thing of they overschedule everything, where it's like, okay, well, because Buffy has to kind of patrol the town and like,
yes,
vampires. So like they try to set up this whole schedule thing of like school and this and that, and they overschedule. It doesn't work out, but eventually everything calms down and they settle in a nice routine. So yeah, but the Giles and Joyce have had some dalliances.
My other question was Dawn. So this is Buffy's sister.
Yes.
She was not in any of the other episodes I watched. She comes in around this time or something, or
she literally pops up.
Long lost sister or something?
At the end of season 4 or 5? I can't remember, but she literally pops up like at the end of one of the seasons. Like
probably season 4 then, because this is season 5, right? So
it's one of the yeah, and it's the fan base. If you ever go online, the fan base is very divided because I think there's a reason why there's a whole thing behind Dawn, which I don't know the whole story on, so I don't want to try and delve into because I'll get it wrong. And if anybody hears this, like I'll get flamed for putting out horrible, you know, how fans are about certain things.
Yes, yeah.
So, but it's this really weird thing where she does pop up, and she might not be real, but I don't know.
She might not be real.
Because here's the thing, like she's not mentioned in anything up until the moment she pops up.
Yeah, but everybody's interacting with her, right?
But yeah, she's real,
Okay, okay.
but
It's
she
not like
doesn't
a
exist
Bruce
until
Willis twist.
it's a whole weird thing. Like I said, I don't know all the details on, and it probably take too much, but like she literally pops up, but she's like a manifestation of something or a bunch of stuff that came together to make
Hmm.
Dawn. But I don't know. It's
I'll have to research. Okay.
yeah. There would have to be a lot of research going in on Dawn. But Dawn plays a big role in this season because, like I said, Buffy's one of the more powerful beings, and she's trying to like Buffy is literally fighting a god in this season. There's a young lady by the name of Glory,
Mm.
Glorificus, who's a literal god, who she has to fight, who's the big bad for this season. And Xander brings it
Interesting.
up later at some point in this episode, like, did Glory do this? She said she would go after Buffy's friends and family, so on and so forth.
Okay, yeah, I didn't understand that. Okay.
But so, Buffy has to fight a literal god, but she can't. Like, there's nothing she can do. We see Joyce was she was a big part of the show for the first few seasons. The actress who played her, Christine Sutherland, she's absent for a lot of season 4. Going into season 5, she told Joss Whedon she wanted to leave the show to travel abroad, and his reply was, "You can't just leave because I'm going to kill you off." Um, Sarah Michelle Gellar fought against the decision to kill off Joyce, but ultimately she lost that fight. But she was a big part because she, as her daughter, made friends with Xander and Willow, and she became to know Giles. Like, her house became kind of like a central point where a lot of stuff
Mm-hmm.
would happen, or people would meet, and so on and so forth. She even had a weird thing where she had some weird African dolls that were causing some issues in the town, like cursed the town or caused some whole things with the town. One episode, she had an episode where she was a focal point of where it was called Moo, Moms Opposed to the Occult, where she brought up like, hey, we have all these weird things, and my daughters are Slayer, and there's vampires and wolves and all these dead people. Why are we allowing this stuff to happen in our town? She gets all the moms in the town riled up. It turns into like this big thing where they're trying to like, and they find out Willow's into witchcraft, and they were trying to burn her at the stake, and they were going to burn Buffy. This whole weird thing, and then they broke the spell because it was some weird German, I don't know, some weird thing. So she became a key cast in the show. So she meant a lot to everybody, right? And Willow's having a hard time dealing with this. And Joss Whedon brings up he went through something similar of trying. I think he said when his mom passed away, he went through trying to figure out the best tie to wear to his mom's funeral. So that's where the whole thing of Willow trying to find that blue sweater that they actually did find. Anya found when she sat in the chair, but didn't know Willow was looking for and just put it in the drawer, right? But once again, it's in some place because stuff is happening. You're so focused on other things, you miss small stuff. And Willow had to change several times. And Xander didn't care about getting a parking ticket because he's trying to be there for his friends and they have to go to the morgue. And unfortunately, he knows where the morgue is because they spend a ton of time at the morgue, right? And this is where we have Anya and her freak out. Because, once again, like I said, we talked about it. If you didn't know, the deal behind her, even Willow kind of forgets initially, where Anya's asking questions like, "Are we going to see the body? Are they going to cut her open?" And Willow's like, "You just stop talking, shut the hell up." But she even forgets she's not used to this. She's not human. She's This is her first time dealing with anything like this at all. So she doesn't know, and that's where Anya has her whole thing about, I was having fruit punch and I realized Joyce will never have fruit punch again. And nobody will explain anything to me. And it man, this episode hit me hard again yesterday, just because.
Yeah, no, this was a this is my favorite of the bunch that we watched. So this is the best out of those, I think. And like the scene that got me was them telling Dawn at school, right? And
Yeah,
all of her like school friends watching, and then like they cut from that and show you from inside the classroom, so you don't actually hear Buffy tell her, right? And it's
yeah.
like silence there, and it just really worked, teared up a bit then. um and that's somebody that doesn't even watch the show, right? Like I've seen 3 episodes, um so it worked. Like a lot of this stuff worked. I'll tell you, the one thing that didn't work for me is the fact that when she goes into the morgue, Dawn, that there actually is somebody to fight there, like something actually
Well,
going on.
so that actually makes sense in a way, because once again, in this town, right, people die all the time. Like this has a
Yeah.
like I don't know, I don't know how many cemeteries this town has, but there's a huge body. But either people don't want to acknowledge or don't know that vampires are real. So in the show, people don't turn to a vampire immediately. They either do turn later at the morgue, or sometimes they turn after they're buried and then they come up from out of the ground or out of the crypt.
So everybody becomes a vampire that dies, or
If they are bitten.
okay. So, but
So
like I didn't realize this person was bitten,
yeah,
I guess.
this just happened to be a guy who was bitten by a vampire. But that
Yeah,
in
I just
this
thought you don't
world,
need
yeah.
that. Like the rest of the rest of the episode was so strong. I don't think you need it to have like the fight scene type thing.
Well, I think it works because it shows that no matter what's going on, Buffy still has things that she has to do.
Like a job
And
to do.
whether it was her sense, whether it was her spidey sense, so to say, of like Dawn had been in the bathroom for a while and knowing Dawn had asked to see the body, of obviously like maybe she snuck down there, but maybe I need to go down there just to check. She had been to the morgue plenty of times, so she knows there's vampires. Like I want to say the third, fourth episode, she actually was trying to have a date with a boy, and they ended up at the morgue or something. And there was a vampire that came out from the morgue, and then she had to break off the date because the guy tried to turn into like a thrill seeker because it was exciting to him. He didn't
Oh
realize like
jeez.
he didn't realize like it was a dangerous situation. Um, I think the title is like "Never Kill a Boy on the First Date" or something like that. But yeah, so like yeah, she's still dealing with grief, but yeah, guess what? The vampires and things aren't gonna stop. And had she had not done that, then that would have been the end of her sister.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this episode has Willow and Tara's first kiss that we see. So
Really? They've been together that whole time. We didn't see it until this episode.
Josh Whedon rejected the idea of a very special episode thing, right? That
Mm.
was also big in the 90s, 2000s, right? He didn't want to do a very special episode format. Um, so he wanted to address the physicality of Willow and Tara's relationship. Before this episode, it showed them holding hands, dancing on screen, but it hadn't shown them kissing on screen, right? Now, before we talk about this, we'll go back. Whedon had talked about he always intended to make somebody in the main cast gay, but he had never really decided on who. I think at one point they were going to have Xander be gay, but then they decided against it. But then in earlier episodes, there are hints that Willow might be gay, but it's not normal hints. Basically, the whole thing I talked about with Anya, where they went into like an alternate reality of like if Buffy had never came, in that alternate reality, Xander and Willow end up turning into vampires. And one of those things, um, weird things happen. The vampire version of Willow ends up being pulled into the normal world. And then they end up dealing with her. And Willow is there and Angel's there. And Willow's talking about it and she's like, she's kind of skanky. And I think she's a little, or she's like, I'm kind of skanky and I think I'm a little bit gay. She's talking about the other version of herself. And Buffy tries to tell her, well, that's from an alternate reality. Like, that doesn't count. Angel brings out, or he starts saying, he's like, actually, when you become he's trying to say, like, when you become a vampire, like, your true self is actually exposed. And, like, what's really inside you will come out. But then he gets, like, an elbow into the ribs, and he has to, like, he gets shut down. So there are hints that there are hints that are thrown out that Willow might be gay, but it's never thought of or revealed until the episode we just saw of
Hush, right?
Hush, where she has that connection with Tara, and then eventually, as it goes on from there, it gets expounded upon. So they in the '90s they had this whole weird thing about female homosexuality. Lesbian kiss episodes were all over the place in TV shows on the night. A lot of times it was dealing with female character kissing another female, but it was never a relationship. It was just them experimenting, realizing they weren't gay, or just, stuff like that. We'd wanted to acknowledge Willow and Tara's affection, but he didn't want to make it like the primary focus of the show. He didn't want it to be like something they were going to advertise,
Right,
and like people
right.
it was going to be built up to, and like people were going to wait for that moment. He got a lot of resistance from the network, the WB. He informed them that Willow and Tara's kiss was not negotiable. According to Whedon, conversation about the kiss was approached by the network executives. They were concerned by the number of gay relationships that they had on their network at the time. So remember, this is Dawson's Creek. This is all of those like teenage shows, late '90s, early 2000s, and there was a lot of things going on.
So I assume they didn't want to be known as like the gay network is probably what they were starting to worry about.
Probably,
Even though it was probably like 3, right? It was probably like 3.
It may have been, or if it may have been more, that could have been the case. That maybe some of their fans were acknowledging the fact that, like, hey, they're actually showing that we're people too, and we have these things, right? But TV network executives are weird people, and some of them are bigots, and they don't want that stuff. We countered with the fact that the kiss was quote unquote true to character. Said he would quit the show if the network forbade it. Said it was the only time in the series he had ever threatened to do so. And obviously he eventually went out. But it was the first time that we saw them show any physical affection between each other than holding hands or with their arm around each other or something small. And it was just something in this moment of, it wasn't romantic, it was just them showing, it was Tara being there for her significant other during a very hard time for her, and honestly, like, it's one of those things, like, I didn't know it was the first time until I did the research for this episode. Like, I remember seeing stuff, and I remember watching episodes up to this, and I was just like, I always assumed it was happened, or it was there. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I just didn't remember it, but I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay.
I think it just shows like how big of a deal it was maybe back then that like nowadays it's not as big of a deal. I mean, like, in the sense of I watched this episode and really thought nothing of it and thought, that they probably had already shown them doing this for quite a time because they were in a relationship. Like I really was just like, oh, that's what people in relationships do. Right. But we kind of have come far from that in 2001. I know it's been like 23 years now, but even like just 8 years later, Modern Family will have, Cam and I'm blanking on his name, but from Jesse Tyler Ferguson's character, that will be like a main couple and stuff. But I guess they don't. I don't know if they really
but it still
kiss that
took a
much,
while.
right?
It
Yeah,
still
like
took a
yeah,
long time for them to show them kissing in the show.
yeah.
Um, and
But
when they did,
it was a
they
big deal. They were showing them get a kid too, though, like adopting a kid. That was a big deal
that was
for
a huge
TV
thing
then.
because that
Yeah.
was also a huge thing at the time about whether gay parents should be able to adopt,
Yes. Yep.
and they dealt with that in the first episode. But I remember, I just recently went through a Modern
That's
Family
right.
phase
That's
and
right.
just
Yeah.
watched it, and I think I do remember hearing about it when it first happened, where it was a big deal, but it wasn't about their first kiss on screen because it happened in the background. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing. It wasn't a focal point, but it was also like the first time they showed it happening in the show. So it, but um, so yeah, these are three of my favorite episodes of Buffy. I do need to finish the series. I acknowledge that. And I texted you yesterday. It was during Hush when I texted you. Like I forgot how much I really enjoyed the show, and I definitely need to start it from the beginning again because those early episodes are really great, and there's a lot of character development that happens, and there's a lot of twists and turns and things that come around. And when I spoiled some of them for you, so I don't know if you'll continue to watch it, but controversy aside of Joss Whedon, he's done some great writing and he's made some great television. And like you said, there are other people who have made great things. He's not the only one involved in the show. The cast and crew uh, did a fantastic job throughout the run of this entire show to get a great story across. And these characters still resonate with people today. There's a young lady on Twitter that I follow. She went through a Buffy rewatch for the first time. And like she's rewatching a bunch of stuff now. But I can't remember how I started following her initially, but she started doing a Buffy rewatch, and it was great to see her go through these episodes for the first time, especially the episodes like where I know what's gonna happen and there's twists and turns. And we had this whole little community on Twitter of not wanting to spoil big things for her. Of like we knew what episodes were coming up, and when a certain episode came up, and then when she would hit these big twists, and then we would like tweet back and forth about it. It was a great little thing to experience or have someone else experience for the first time.
Yeah. So these are your three favorite, you said?
These are three of my favorite. There are some other good ones, but these are three that I really enjoy. Probably not the best three I think to get someone to start on, but I'd probably have to do some more research on that. But still, three of my favorite.
So I forget how we did this for The Office, but so I'll give out of 5 stars for all 3 episodes here. Like for each one, I have a rating for each one.
Okay.
So I mentioned that this one was my favorite of the bunch, so I have this as a 5 out of 5 stars.
Wow.
Okay. Then the next one, Hush, I have at 4.5 stars.
Wow. Okay.
With Zeppo being probably 3 out of 5 stars.
I can get that. Zeppo is definitely a bad one to start off on, and I think maybe had you seen it afterwards or had more knowledge, you might rate it higher. But I can get that.
Yeah, like maybe if we had did 4 episodes and we started with like a pilot, so you understand the group dynamic or whatever, and then
I get that.
and then those. But yeah.
Here's a question: would you be interested in watching the series as a whole now after watching these episodes and hearing me babble about it for the last hour and a half or so?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it. I've thought about watching this before the podcast as well, just because I remembered seeing bits and pieces, and I've always heard good things about it. And I like Joss Whedon's work, right? Like Avengers Age of Ultron.
I didn't even know he did Roseanne. I was like, wow.
Yeah, he's been around for a while doing all kinds of stuff. So I haven't watched Firefly, but I've heard good things about that as well. That's another one of his shows. Only lasted
Serenity,
a season.
Firefly. I think there's True Calling. There was one he did called Dollhouse, I really enjoyed, but it
Yes,
only lasted like a
Eliza
season or
Dushku's in
something.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I don't know. I think it'll be there in the back of my mind. It's one of those things. Like, okay, will I want to commit for the 7 seasons? And then probably getting roped into Angel or something. Like it's like, yeah, that'll be probably in a few years if I'm doing it right.
Not only that, but there's so much out right now, and there's
Yes.
like the plethora of stuff we have is it's making it difficult to find these things or catch up on these things because we have Agatha All Along getting ready to come out. So like I'm not missing that, right? Uh, but then who knows what else is gonna be there? Or
It's
I
about
know,
balance, right? Like
but
they're
for you, Ted Lasso, I think is getting ready to come out for the next season here, or they just
they
started
got
filming like
renewed.
a
They
season.
haven't filmed yet, but they are renewed. So yeah, that'll be something that I'll be watching
Now, does Apple do that weekly, or does Apple drop that all at once?
weekly.
Okay.
And actually, we covered that over on our soccer podcast on weekly drops for season 3. We were doing that. And it was lots of listens.
See, now here's the thing too. I think I understand the aspect of the binging model of dropping everything at once, but I prefer a weekly model where
Yes.
like it's kind of appointment thing, and like you
Well,
watch it and then you have the chance to discuss it with people, and you're not someone's not on
here,
season episode 12 and you're on
yeah.
2, and you know.
Here's a good example. So Amazon Prime had a new Batman cartoon, Caped Crusader, came out. They dropped all 10 episodes at once. I watched the first 2 or 3 and then had some other stuff going on. And then Rings of Power have come back on for Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings. So I rewatched season 1, then I'm watching season 2. And then it's like The Acolyte was on Disney Plus at the same time, so I was finishing up watching that. And what happens is, and now Agatha's coming up, like you said. Right now, especially because we just had a child, I only have limited TV time. Okay,
Yeah.
so when it comes time to sit down and watch something, it's like I'm making my sit down moments for that appointment viewing of this week this show comes out. I'm watching this episode tonight, or I'm watching this episode this morning. And then what happens is the show that dropped all 10 episodes that I still have 7 left to watch is not in my mind because I am instead thinking what's coming out this week. Oh, Only Murders in the Building on Tuesday. Lord of the Rings on Thursday,
Yeah. You
so like
start
that.
setting
So
up
I'm looking forward to
appointments, and
those.
you start blocking off that period of time where you know, like, I can carve 30 minutes out here or there, or even if I'm holding my kid, I can probably carve out 45 minutes to watch
Right,
this.
right.
But can I fit 3 hours to try and binge the rest of this show? Probably not.
Yeah, and that's what's been tough, and it's why I do enjoy the weekly model so much better, is because I can build my week around it. There's a reason why that was the one that worked for so long, you know. It's because people would build their weeks around it. They'd be sitting at home watching TV, and they would say, "Oh, Tuesday night, I'm watching this show." Instead, it's like we're dropping all of this show on Friday, and it's like, great. Well, the weekend I'm actually busy doing this, this, and this. And instead, people don't have the time to binge that. Like the hardcore fans do, right? Like if I didn't have a newborn right now, I probably would have been able to binge it all and would have done the podcast on it on our DC podcast and would have had that out really quick. But now that I'm a little bit more limited on time, it is a little bit more. I have to be very delicate with what I'm picking and watching, especially with how many podcasts I have, because then I have to set aside time for the podcast. So
Yeah.
that's another thing. Okay. So we will move on to the next pick, and it's my pick. And we're going back to the world of film. And Casey, Grease is the word. And we are going to be watching Grease
I thought bird
next
was the word.
week. Not in this house. Grease is the word. So let me go ahead and just double check where this is findable. I think it's on Paramount Plus. That's what I thought. So Paramount Plus.
I just renewed my subscription because I need it for football.
There you go. Right. So Casey, no problem. We'll be watching it. Paramount Plus is where you can find Grease. You can also rent it if you needed to rent it, people listening. But it also says it's on Fubo. But yeah. But yes, that's what we're going to be picking. So, John Travolta.
Oh my god.
Olivia Newton-John. And actually, one of these songs from the movie is what we used in our wedding. Like when there's a scene, there's a time at the wedding where you're supposed to have your friends, get introduced as they're going out to the ballroom to get their tables, and then we get introduced and stuff. So we used one of the songs during that part while we're walking into the ballroom and stuff. So, but yeah, so that's what we'll be doing. Grease, Paramount Plus. Okay. Anything else before we head out?
No, just glad to be back. Hope everybody's looking forward to a fun season, and see what kind of shenanigans we can get into.
Yeah, no, really looking forward to getting back into the groove. Every other week is what I think I may have said next week. Sorry. Every other week is what this episode, what this podcast drops, and we'll be going until around May. Casey mentioned it, Agatha All Along. By the time you're hearing this, I think the show might be done. We're still near ending. Casey and I covering that over on our Marvel podcast, The Infinity Saga and Beyond. I mentioned Rings of Power. That season will be done by the time this comes out. But if you watched it and want to listen to it, my friend Ron and I just launched a new podcast called The Fantasy Folk, where we talk all things fantasy like Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. We covered that over on The Fantasy Folk, so you can check that out as well. But yeah, most of my plugs there. Have a great rest of your week. We'll catch you next time when we talk Grease.